From the Oregon State University Extension Service, this is Pollination, a podcast that tells the stories of researchers, land managers, and concerned citizens making bold strides to improve the health of pollinators. I'm your host, Dr. Adoni Melathopoulos, Assistant Professor in Pollinator Health in the Department of Horticulture. The Cooperative Extension Service across the United States is a remarkable resource on pollinator health, and you can think about the various aspects in which extension has this influence, anywhere from someone like myself, extension specialist focusing on pollinator health, but you can think of the master gardeners. Many states have master beekeeper programs, even some of the specific crop specialists, take the berry crop specialists. We had Lisa DeVetter on a previous episode, also providing a lot of really timely advice on pollinator health. I'm always excited when I learn of a new specific pollinator health extension position, and this week we have Laura Johnson. She's the University of Vermont's brand new extension pollinator support specialist. And in this episode, we're going to hear a little bit about her program, and also we're going to take the trip up to cold, snowy Vermont and hear about some of the pollinator health specific issues for Vermont and how the position came about. So this week, I'm taking pollination up to the Northeast. We're going to be talking with Laura Johnson on pollination. Laura, welcome to Pollination.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Well, I'm so glad to have you here. It's so exciting to hear. I always love hearing about new extension positions in pollinator health. And there's a new position now in Vermont that since July you've been you're leading up. And I guess we had a brief conversation before this, and there's a lot of extension positions in pollinator health that are focused on apiculture. And tell us about your new position and how it might differ from sort of a traditional apiculture position.
Yeah. So my title officially is Pollinator Support Specialist. So my position, I think, is more broadly focused. So it includes thinking about all pollinators and farm systems and in agriculture, and recognizing wild pollinator species and bee species, in addition to managed pollinators like honeybees. So I feel, my position is a little bit more broad and focuses more on the wild community, but also recognizes the importance of those managed bees as well in pollination services and decision-making on farms.
And I suppose those two things came together because of some unique issues in Vermont around pollinator health and, how both of these both kind of groups, both native and honeybees, are contributing to pollination. Can you tell us a little bit about what's a snapshot of what Vermont looks like when it comes to pollinator health and some of the concerns out there?
Yeah, well, Vermont is a really small state, and it's been interesting for me in this position because Vermont, our culture is very connected to agriculture, and we really pride ourselves on a lot of different types of agriculture, despite the fact that our landscape, compared to other parts of the United States, is not that great for agriculture. We have, it's really pretty rocky in some parts. It's like really heavy clay in other parts. A lot of hillsides that aren't great for running your tractor across, and but pretty small scale in terms of ag. But and because of that, also it's kind of a unique landscape in that we have a lot of opportunity for habitat for things outside of agriculture, like wildlife, and for me, thinking about pollinators. And so coming into this position, I was kind of like, well, what is insect decline in Vermont? What is pollinator decline in Vermont? Is it really concerned? Because when I look outside, I see all these, field edges really heavily, populated with what could be potential pollinator habitat. But the reality is that as a state, we are not immune to the declines that we're seeing across the nation and across the world. There are still, in particular, bumblebees that are highlighted in the research. There's 3 that are listed as endangered or threatened, and one's about to be added. So, and the growers in our state are, definitely aware, especially the tree fruit and blueberry and bramble growers, who go out and they really depend on these pollinator services. They're seeing fluctuations of these pollinators in their crops. So whether or not that's decline or just shifts in communities that naturally happen every year is a question. But in Vermont, despite our landscape, we still do experience this threat that the rest of the world is also experiencing. So, but I think it's also because of our small scale agriculture that we have here. We have a lot of opportunity, I think, to just continue to enhance and cultivate habitat for wild pollinators and pollination services in managed landscapes. And, several native Vermont species are closely associated with flowers of cultivated plants on these farms. So, it may even mean that we have an opportunity to create more abundance and of pollinators in those managed landscapes with some intentional strategizing on how to do that.
When I think of the Northeast, I think, I think of tree fruit, especially apples. But at the break, we were talking that there is a sizable high bush blueberry. There's no low bush in Vermont, is there?
No, not that I have yet to see.
Okay.
There may be. I just haven't yet seen a producer. But mostly it's high bush blueberries. And yes, there are quite a few growers here in the state growing high bush blueberries.
So that's in terms of like crop output that might depend on some of these native bees. That's one. I imagine there's a close association with bumblebees and blueberries as they're able to sonicate and get pollen out of those poricidal anthers. But I know there's I remember working in low bush just across the line in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia with low bush that, there's also many other species that can sonicate. Taxa groups. It's not just bumblebees. There's other bees that can do this, but maybe overlooked by the growers because they know bumblebees, but they don't know Adrena or something.
Right. Yeah. And that has been interesting in talking with growers. I've been wondering about, how can we maybe decide on a sort of monitoring protocol in blueberries in Vermont that works for growers in making these decisions around are there enough wild pollinators, or do I need to think about bringing in some managed honeybees or bumblebees? And when I ask growers, how are you going out and monitoring now? It's often, I'm walking the lines of my blueberries and I'm listening. And the bumblebees have that really distinct sound, and whereas some other species may not. And so how do we think about and include the awareness of those other types of bees that might be doing the work too? So
I love that idea of a grower being able to go out from year to year. I remember Frank Drummond in Maine had a kind of similar idea where there's a nice, easy tool where a grower can go out and say their 3-year average is this. And then they know I don't need to bring in more honeybees, or I really have a great, there's a great endowment of native bees in my area, and I may want to spend some money on augmenting the habitat. It really gives them a picture of what's visiting. That sounds like a great a great thing to do. And I guess it raises the question, as you're really new, you've just, months into the job, what are you hoping to get done in addition to that in your first year? What are sort of your goals?
That's a good question.
I was talking at the break, and when I first started, I really felt like there was so much to do. It was a brand new position, and it was overwhelming. And but I also remember some of the thoughts I had at the very beginning held true to me. They really were, they were right. But tell me, right now we'll catch up with you in 5 years to check on this. But what's up front of your priority list on year one?
Yeah, well, I know I've been thinking a lot about this and, what are the steps that I need to take to move forward? And I think first for me, I've been working in extension for a little while prior to this particular role that I'm in now. And most recently, I was working in soil health and water quality and cover cropping and nutrient management on farms, and which has been really helpful as I approach this position, because I know I have an awareness of sort of these ecological goals that farms are already striving towards. So incorporating cover crops or minimal tillage or no-till, depending on their system. If they're a vegetable farm in particular, those are things that they might be including. And so kind of recognizing these other layers in farm management systems that could also provide resources to pollinators and bees. So recognizing, climate resilience is really important to growers, and growers are really great at growing cover crops, and there's a lot of potential cover crops that could be, instead of being terminated, incorporated, maybe exist as an additional resource for pollinators and encouraging pollinator populations on farms. So I've been thinking a lot about those management practices and how to move forward. Adding that extra component of where do pollinators fit in. So I think I'd like to start with pollinator plantings and see where there's traction with that, in particular thinking about cover crops and where farms are already at and using them, and where can we maybe make some strips for pollinators on the farms. And then also really it's just to continue to, do a needs assessment and prioritize based on that, and listen and stay flexible. And ultimately in this world, especially here in UVM, we are totally, grant funded, donor funded. So our programming is really heavily dependent on getting funding for this work. And so a lot of this initial work will be on and establishing that funding base in order to bring it to the field and to growers.
I guess in many people, extension, everybody kind of knows what extension is, but, sometimes how it operates is a little opaque to people. And I guess the specialist position is in some ways supposed to be, we have extension, I imagine in Vermont the same way, extension office and kind of county-based faculty who look to the specialist for guidance. So on cover cropping and maybe a little tweak, just let the cover crop last a couple, 2 more weeks and you really get this benefit for pollinators or something like that. That comes out. But I guess the other thing that people may not realize when an extension program gets up and running is there is this, big focus on needs assessment, being able to go out to stakeholders, and that needs assessment is critical. When I go to a granting agency and they ask, why should we give you this money? And you say, well, I've gone to stakeholders and they've identified these as the 3 major things they need to be able to do their work.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And in Vermont Extension, UVM Extension is unique. I think we're one of, very few states that we don't have county government. And so our our extension offices are, throughout the state, but they aren't necessarily in per county. Our neighboring state, New Hampshire, does have county extension. So, it functions a little differently here in Vermont, but ultimately the goals are the same.
I will point out there's some Oregon counties that could put 7 Vermonts in it.
Yeah. So we basically all work statewide, which is feasible in our state.
Well, I'm always curious because there has been, some recent positions in pollinator health, this new trend in more broadly focused pollinator extensions positions. And I'm always curious about the circumstances behind those positions because they come about clearly, largely not through federal initiatives, but local needs that have been identified. Can you tell me a little bit about the circumstances that brought about the position in Vermont?
Yeah, well, to my knowledge, in the beginning of the year in May, when blueberries were starting to flower and blossom, there were observations being made by growers around the state. And the Vermont Vegetable and Berry Growers Association has a really robust community and listserv that folks communicate on throughout the season or all year round. And so some of the folks who have blueberries on their farms put out this question to the listserv and to the group about, are you seeing bumblebees in your blueberries right now? Because I'm not. And or maybe I'm just seeing a few. So this spring, there was this very lively conversation about what was going on, and some local researchers and other extension specialists were brought into that conversation. And there wasn't, any grand conclusion about what was happening, but there were some ideas around why. And one of those was that it was a little bit earlier of a spring. And so bumblebees were not quite out and about as much in population as they normally might be in another spring at the time of flower blossom. So there was kind of this mismatch in weather and insect activity that may have been causing these observations by growers. And then also there were some other folks that went out and they may not have been noticing bumblebees, but they were noticing other types of wild bees that were a little more subtle in their character and pollinating. So, and based on Dr. Taylor Ricketts, who works in the Gunn Institute and is housed in the Gunn Institute of Environment at UVM, is doing a lot of research on pollination. And based on his reaction to this communication, he highlighted, annually and, over time, there are these natural fluctuations in insect populations. So it may just be that it's not a great bumblebee year, and it might be, some other, the minor bees are out, and they're doing the bulk of the pollination services. So there was, growers were asking, like, do I need to buy in bumblebees? How many? Or is everything going to be okay? So that really sparked this need to maybe draw some more awareness about, what else is out there that we can be looking for in our crops. But I feel like my position also is to collaborate with a lot of existing folks that are doing really good work in pollinators and in agriculture, and just helping to disseminate some of that information specific to grower need. And I think that's been something that's, been in the conversation for a while, and this particular issue around blueberry pollination this spring just kind of gave a push for the position to be created. So
that's really remarkable. It's a lot of these positions that come about maybe urban concerns or kind of broader public concerns. It's really interesting to see a position in pollinator health that comes at the prompting of growers.
Yeah, it's really exciting. And for me, that's what inspires me to, hone in on the work that I have to do, because I just have so much respect for farmers and what they do for our food systems. And I just hope that I can serve needs that they have.
Fantastic. Well, let's take a quick break. I always love doing the last segment of, book recommendations with brand new faculty members. So this is a brand new faculty edition of your guest recommendation. So we'll be back in just 1 second. Okay, we're back. So, book recommendation. What does a new pollinator health extension specialist recommend?
Yeah, well, beyond the Bees in Your Backyard book that I think everybody turns to for identification, my book recommendation is actually a little more broadly focused, not specifically on pollinators, but Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Walkemer. It's a really lovely book written by, she's a scientist, but also a citizen of a Native American group in New York. And she really draws attention to recognizing ourselves as part of the natural world and not, separate from it, which is something for me personally seems like intuitive, but not something that I always remember. And which I think is, it's important to remember that we are also part of this world, and the decisions that we make impact everything else. And we are all, we're all part of the big wildlife web. So it's not a specific pollinator book, but it just really helps to, it really helped me to realign my career and desire for what I do and what motivates me.
My best friend recommended that I read that book, so I ought to now. Second recommendation.
Yes, very good.
Okay, so that's the book recommendation. How about a go-to tool for somebody who's just starting to use that tool?
My gosh, all of my colleagues, I don't know if that's a cop-out, but everybody that, stakeholders, everybody that I've been working with, growers, other university specialists, entomologists that have been, shouting about pollinators forever and already know so much and have so much to share. And I just really appreciate the resources that are out there in the community that I live in and work in. So, but in terms of a hands-on tool, so far it's been my camera and just taking pictures and going back and looking up, what bee did I see today, and this farm or on this plant. So,
well,
those are my two tools.
Cameras, I love taking pictures, and it's always great. And then I always think in an extension as well, those pictures you come to rely on because you're showing other people things. But I loved your first answer because it seems to me like people see an extension program and they see the person who's the specialist, but it's clearly constituted by the stakeholders. Extension is so embedded in its practice but also the other specialists and local agents, that it is really a team approach. And I think that's the power of cooperative extension.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, well, that brings us to just to throw you on the hot seat now. Like, love throwing this question out. It's like, we had a podcast with a honeybee person whose, favorite pollinator species was a bird, shockingly. But I'm so curious about you. So do you have a favorite pollinator species at this point?
Well, it's interesting. So my background with, pollinators is as a honeybee keeper. And, I very small scale keep honeybees and sell a little bit of honey here and there. But I would say the pollinator that I wanted to mention today is is Jatai, which is the name that I learned for it when I was in the Peace Corps in Paraguay. It's a small stingless bee, and in different parts of South America, Central America, beekeepers do keep this bee and rear it for honey. And the claim is that the honey has a lot of really important medicinal properties to it that are different than European honeybee honey. So I had to look up what the scientific name was, because I never really knew it or learned it. And I'm going to butcher it, but it's Tetragoniska angustula. But it's a very small bee, stingless. And when I was down in Paraguay, I was lucky enough to be living in a community with a lot of subsistence farmers, and some of those farmers were also beekeepers, and bees down there honeybees are the Africanized. So working with honeybees in Paraguay was definitely got stung a lot, which was tolerable, but not the most fun as compared to working with honeybees here in Vermont or the Northeast. So when I learned of this other stingless bee, I couldn't believe it. And I just thought it was the greatest thing. And just also really cool.
I'm always surprised. I've seen them before. I've seen various species, and there's a lot of diversity, but they're tiny little things. They're shockingly small.
Yes, they're very tiny. And so I don't know if I would say it's my favorite bee, but it's definitely like the first bee species beyond honeybees that I was introduced to, the European honeybee that I was introduced to. And I just thought it was the coolest thing. So
fantastic. Well, we will have you back in 5 years or sooner, hopefully.
Great.
And we will see how this changes. But thank you so much for taking the time. We're very excited about your new program, and wishing you all the best up there in Vermont. Stay warm.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening. The show is produced by Quinn Sinan Neal, who's a student here at OSU in the New Media Communications program, and the show wouldn't even be possible without the support of the Oregon Legislature, the Foundation for Food and Agricultural Research, and Western SARE. Show notes with links mentioned on each episode are available on the website, which is at pollination.podcast.oregonstate.edu. I also love hearing from you, and there's several ways to connect with me. The first one is you can visit the website and leave an episode-specific comment. You can suggest a future guest or topic, or ask a question that could be featured in a future episode. But you can do the same things on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook by visiting the Oregon Bee Project. Thanks so much for listening, and see you next week.